A very good Monday morning to you. You are watching Y in the Morning only on Y254 channel. And I hope you did catch the splendid interviews we just had a few minutes ago with myself, Valentine. And, it's Barimo in absentia. And at me, Hilda Wadidi. So don't go anywhere. It's about that time we delve into the heart of Mondays, according to me, that is, which is youth and politics. And with me in studio, in the spirit of the National Climate Conference that's come up, and we're having the 7th one this particular year, we want to talk about climate change governance in this country. And with me in studio, I'd like to introduce my guests. I'll allow them to introduce themselves. Let me start with you, Nicholas.
Okay, thank you, Hilda. My name is Nicholas Abuya. I work with the Christian Aid Kenya Country Program as a climate change governance officer.
I like that.
My name is Atieno Maureen Brenda. I work with Jesuit Hakimani Center, and I work as the program coordinator for Climate Smart Water Governance Project in Kenya.
All right, thank you so much for joining us in studio today. And if you do want to participate in the conversation on social media, you can find us at Y254 channel. The hashtag is Y in the Morning. Today class is in session. I've also learned a lot of new things today, but I'd like to start with Nicholas, because Nicholas is like the main lecturer today, and he's going to let us know about this National Climate Change Conference that's about to happen. And we'd like to understand the history behind this particular climate change governance issue.
Okay, thank you very much, Hilda. What I would point out is that at this point in time, we are about to host a National Climate Change Governance Conference tomorrow, which will happen at Safari Park Hotel.
Yes.
And we are aiming at linking the national level processes in terms of climate change governance with what is happening at the counties. And we've invited a number of stakeholders, including the media, academia, the youth, and even the private sector, including the CSOs. So the reason why we are calling at this conference is basically to have a moment to stop and reflect what role the counties, and particularly the communities and the people down there, are playing in the implementation of the climate change action plans that the national government has put in place. And this is also happening against the background that, as you are aware, in 2015, we had this global agreement known as the Paris Agreement on Climate Change. So ideally speaking, Kenya as a nation made its commitment on what we refer to as the national determined contribution. And when you look at the governance dispensation in Kenya, we have the national government and the county government. So where does the county government and the communities sit when it comes to making their contribution to the nationally determined contribution? Tomorrow will be a perfect opportunity for all these stakeholders to come together, stop and reflect what is the space of the communities and the county governments when it comes to contributing to the national determined contribution.
All right. So before we get back to you, and you can give us a bit of background information on where this whole climate change policy came from, I'd like to understand from Maureen over there, your specialty is water governance. Why is water governance so important? Why is it an issue?
First of all, just backwards, the counties where we are implementing the water governance is in Garissa and Kilifi. And these two counties fall under ASALs, the counties that have challenges in terms of water. You've seen demonstrations even in Garissa, where people are coming and making noise about the counties not being able to deliver water, even at the township, the city center.
Yes.
Now, the issue is water. The quantity of water is not even enough. Yeah, I know there's the Tana River that is flowing through Garissa, and Garissa town is at the center of it's right by the banks of River Tana, but then they still cannot access enough water for their usage at the town levels, leaving alone the other sub-counties where the communities cannot access water completely, and they have to rely on either water pans or water boozers that bring water from Garissa town into the sub-counties. So water governance is an issue because, first of all, there is the little resource, and then secondly, how do we manage? how do we use it in a way that others are able to access it throughout the counties, the 2 counties specifically that we are working in. So how do we manage it? Looking at all stakeholders, from the government side, that is the county government, the water companies, that is the Gawasco, Garissa Water and Sewage Company, or Kimawasco, Kilifi Mariakani Water Company, or Malindi Water Company, and then we have the communities themselves. How do we manage this little resource that we have so that we can all be able to access it? As it is said, water is life. Yes.
All right, now that you're talking about different counties and how different counties are managing their water, we recently had Mwangi Wairia saying that we need to pay for the water that's coming from Murang'a, and you had an opinion about it. So I'd like to hear what you guys think.
I'd just bring the concept of shared ecosystem. Our biggest problem is that the River Tana runs from, let's say, Nyeri, there is like Kipia, there is Embu. All these water resources are going down into the river that ends into Garissa as River Tana, and eventually to Tana River. And on the other side, we are looking at Kilifi. Kilifi, we have Athi River. Athi River, we are talking about Kajiado, we are talking about Nairobi, we are talking about Makueni and the others. The water comes from these other counties, and they are going down to to Kilifi County, for example. Now, it is a shared water resource, and the question is there a policy on how to manage this water for all these other counties? We are talking about downstream and upstream. What happens up there in Nyeri and like Kipia and Embu affects what's happening in Garissa, and you saw that with the floods. Initially, there's a period where we don't have water completely in Garissa. There's little water, and then there's a period where we have too much water. Then there is a need to have a conversation about how this resource is shared, of coming all the way from the upstream counties and downstream counties, because there's a lacuna, and that's why you are having Honorable Mwangi, the governor for Murang'a County, sorry, and he's talking about Nairobi paying a certain amount of money to Murang'a, but that is a resource that belongs to the country, isn't it?
Yes.
Shouldn't we have a conversation with all these other counties on how then we can share?
Yes.
We can share the responsibilities of maintaining the resource, the sources. We were having a conversation with Nicholas, and he was talking about how perhaps the money shouldn't go to the specific counties where the water originates from, but into conserving those sources.
All right. I'm so glad you've introduced conservation, because now I can slide back to Nicholas and I can ask him to give us a bit of history about how the Paris Act, because someone at home is as green as I was when it came to this particular subject, and we'd like to make it easy for the young people at home to also understand. Give us a bit of background until the big milestone we got to in May 2016 when we got this Climate Change Act. So can we just go step by step?
Well, thank you, Ilda. What I would point out is that it has been a journey of many years, of course.
Yes.
We live in a global environment where actually what happens elsewhere affects everyone else.
Yes.
Actually, issues of environment don't have like boundaries. So in 1992, we had the Earth Summit. The Earth Summit was convened by global leaders to stop and reflect what was happening to the Earth. And one of the key outcomes of that Earth Summit that happened at Rio was what we refer to as the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So there were several issues that were identified. One of the key issues that was identified that was impacting on lives on Earth was climate change. So ever since then, this outfit was formed to manage a dialogue and conversation among the Committee of Nations on what can be done to address what was being observed by science as a changed climate, which was resulting to increased temperatures and therefore influencing the way the weather and the climate behaves, if I may describe it as such in a layman's language.
Yes.
So ever since then, a lot of negotiations have been going on. First of all, we came up with an agreement which was referred to as the Kyoto Protocol, given by the name because it was arrived at in a Kyoto meeting in Japan. So the Kyoto Protocol had some objectives in terms of addressing what contributes to global warming or climate change as we know it. And this is basically emission of what we call greenhouse gases. And if I'm not wrong, the youth can associate with this because many of the youth are people in school and universities they are studying, especially those in the sector of environment and even sciences. They know very well when you talk about greenhouse gases. They have heard about it or they have interacted with it. So the Kyoto Protocol basically had a binding agreement more so to what we call Annex 1 countries or the developed countries, because historically they are responsible for emitting greenhouse gases, which has influenced the change in climate change. So as the time went on, there was a feeling that the agreement was not comprehensive enough. We needed a robust agreement which included all the countries, developed and developing as well. So that's how the Paris Agreement came about in 2015 after protracted discussion along the line so that it can replace the Kyoto Protocol. In 2015, luckily, the world leaders in Paris met, and we had an agreement which is binding to all countries that have subscribed to it, known as the Paris Climate Change Agreement. So this Paris Agreement binds both national, both developed and developing countries, unlike the Kyoto Protocol, and it will come into effect in 2020. That is when Kyoto Protocol will end. So the key commitment in the Paris Agreement is that the community of nations commit to cut down the emission of greenhouse gases so that we cannot go beyond an increase in temperature of more than 2 degrees Celsius, but aiming at 1.5 degrees Celsius, because it has been recognized that actually the atmospheric temperatures have changed, and when they change, they drastically influence climate conditions, and these climate conditions are manifesting themselves in forms of prolonged droughts. You've heard about flooding, you hear about the tsunamis and stuff like that. Basically, that's how those small kind of change of temperature can impact on our lives. So at this point in time, Kenya as a nation, we are part of the community of nations. We are also working towards fulfilling our part of the commitment, what we refer to as the nationally determined contribution, international commitment on the part of Kenya. And to effect that, Kenya has gone ahead even to put in place the Climate Change Act of 2016, which is basically a policy legal framework to coordinate climate change response in Kenya. But now, taking into consideration that we are operating in a devolved system of governance, the question is, what is the role of the county governments and the communities down there? So that's why we are convening a national climate change governance conference to bring on board actors from the communities and from the counties to join the rest of the other stakeholders so that we can discuss and reinvigorate their role in pushing Kenya's achieving its commitment in the form of nationally determined contribution.
All right, that's very interesting, because I like how you've mentioned that we do have policies and frameworks that are supposed to govern our particular climate change and what have you. However, we have had issues of implementation, and I'd like to understand from you guys, because this is the reason why this has landed on youth and politics. We'd like to understand how politics has interfered with the implementation of some of the policies. If you have any examples you can give us, then we would better understand.
Well, politics, if I go at it first, politics plays at different levels. Global, it can be regional and even national and even subnational. So if I may point out the global level, in Paris Agreement of 2015, United States is a big country in terms of its contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions. It's one of the leading polluters. And by then, it was the Democrats who were in power, President Obama, and they were very robust in terms of supporting the agreement. However, like 3 or 4 years down the line, we have a new administration. Trump came into power from the conservative, the Republican. And of course, is not very comfortable with the commitment that were made in Paris, particularly on the part of the USA. That's already, we are seeing some global politics coming into it, and we are not very sure how that will impact on the Paris Agreement, given that USA is such a big entity. Those are global politics. But when you come to, say, the national level, I want really to thank our government currently, particularly our president, for assenting to the Climate Change Act of 2016 and putting in place governance structures. However, now we are moving from policy to implementation. We want now the government to commit sufficient funds to support implementation of those policies in terms of climate change actions. And I would really point out very strongly, particularly for the youth, that when it comes to what we call intergenerational equity, the youth are the major stakeholders when it comes to matters of development and what will happen to this earth. You are likely to live longer than most of the people, yeah, and even the coming generation. So we like to see the youth taking a central role, yeah, when it comes to decision making on issues that affects development, because directly and indirectly they are affected and they are going to live longer than anybody else. So I would expect that tomorrow the youths whom we have invited, including the media, will be at Safari Park Hotel also to put in on the table their views on how they would like issues of climate change handled in Kenya and also feeding to the global processes.
All right.
Just to add on the politics, particularly following what Nicholas has said about national government responsiveness. I think in the counties that we are working, specifically Garissa, they are responsive because they've developed a climate change policy at the county. And one of the biggest challenges we always say, yes, we have so many good policies, but then where is the implementation? And implementation starts at setting aside funds for rolling out the plans. And for Garissa County, they've started somewhere and they've set aside 2% of their budget, county budget, into climate change fund. And for me, I think that is progress. And it reads all the way from from the top. And he talked about the president's role in all this. So they are following, they are looking at what the president is doing, and it's something that is rolling down from up. So politics matters, and it starts from up there.
Okay, very good. There's something that I would like us to finish with, which is the loss and damage aspect. That we'd like to understand the damage that us not taking care of the environment and not really paying too much attention to the climate change has done. So we'd like to understand that. But before we do that, I'd like for I've just realized that I didn't read the Climate Change Act. So someone at home is like, oh, what does the act say? Okay, so so it was signed into law on 6th of May, and the goal of the act is to provide a regulatory framework for an enhanced response to climate change and to provide mechanisms and measures to improve resilience to climate change and promote low carbon development. Okay, so the act adopts a mainstreaming approach, provides a legal basis for climate change activities through the National Climate Change Action Plan, and establishes the National Climate Change Council and the Climate Fund, which is what you're talking about, people setting aside funds to be able that these projects, these policies can actually be implemented. However, now let's go to the heart of the topic, which is the loss and the damage of us not paying attention as young people to this. So I don't know who wants to go first on this one.
First of all, I would like to talk about the attitude of the youth. You know, there is the conversation that the youth are complaining that they are not being involved, and there are no spaces.
Yes.
I would agree with them on one ground and disagree with them on the other ground. And actually I should be saying agree with us, because I am a youth.
Yeah, youth, yes.
Yes, so on one front, I'd say there is a little bit of laxity for involving the youth, particularly if you look at appointments in the government. If we are not going to give us a chance to take part in governance issues, particularly giving us responsibilities and appointing us to some of these sectors, then you're not involving us on that front. But where I'm not agreeing with us is on the front that we say we are not involved, but we don't have an attitude of interest. If you talk to the youth about climate change right now, they will give you beautiful definitions of what it is. And because they've studied these things. But then if you talk about what can you do at your own small level, A few of them will talk to you about how to use music and art and all these other youth-centered interest areas to talk about or influence the society on these issues. But most of them will be like, it's not my problem.
You see, that's exactly why I'm telling you I want to hear about the damage, because you did mention now we are having human and wildlife conflict over water.
Yes.
So yes, please tell us about that.
About the conflicts, for example. Now, water is a resource, and climate change directly affects the quantity of water that we can now access as a country.
Yes.
Let me talk at the country level. Now, places like Garissa, Garissa has a section with wildlife, and in a couple of years ago, they had their own sources of water in the wilderness.
Yes.
And now these resources have been depleted. They are not there. Now what's happening is they have to come out and come to where the human settlements are, and we are having hyena attacks, and we are having crocodile attacks, and what will people do? They retaliate and kill all these animals.
Yes.
So at the end of the day, we are going to have a situation where hyenas that originally existed in Garissa and were feeding, the system of how this relies on this, eats this to reduce the quantity of this and all that. Because I saw a research
the food chain, everything
the food chain. Yes, I saw some research done in the US park where they removed all the wolves, and that affected the climate in the sense that the vegetable eating animals ate everything in the area. And then the water was done away with, and all that kind of. So we are going to see that kind of thing happening in Garissa as well, because if we kill all the hyenas that are feeding on antelopes and dik and what have you, and then we are going to have an extinction of at least one of the animals.
All right. Nicholas, there's something you mentioned about adaptation and mitigation.
Yeah.
And I'd like you to touch on that because it's a bit complex, and I'd just like you to talk about some of these solutions to the changing climate.
Yeah, basically, when we talk about climate change actions, they are in two kind of broad categories. They are either mitigation or adaptation. And when you talk about mitigation, we look at really cutting down further emissions of greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, because these gases, when they are emitted, they contribute to the global warming.
Yes.
And when we talk about the greenhouse gases, basically they emanate from like the burning of fossil fuels like petrol and diesel and stuff, or coal, for example, the carbon dioxide and others. Those are the greenhouse gases, among others. So when we take measures to limit or to control extra kind of emission, we are mitigating. So that's a mitigation action. But when you come to adaptation, it's basically like we are living in a changed climate, which is a reality. When we adjust our natural and human systems, then we are adapting. For example, if we realize that due to climate change, we are experiencing more flooding, the city of Nairobi decides to work on drainage systems, expanding them, making them better. That's an adaptation measure. Or if the farmers, say down in Makueni and Kitui, realize that actually the rainfall has reduced because of the climate change, and therefore we need to plant drought-tolerant crops like cassava or sorghum, they are adapting. Basically, that's how I can define adaptation. And come to think about it, the youth have got a role to play in this, in terms of providing a support, because they have got the capacity, they have got the knowledge, they are just coming out of colleges and stuff like that, so that they contribute towards enhanced adaptation and mitigation to address climate change. If you may allow me briefly to talk about loss and damage. Loss and damage is a serious thing when it comes to climate change. As I told you, climate change is basically manifesting in terms of increased temperatures, for example, reduced rainfall. Take a case of Mount Kenya. The glaciers at the top of Mount Kenya were quite visible some years back. Now, if you travel towards Nanyuki or any other side where you can have a clear view of Mount Kenya, very little of it is seen. Already that's a loss, because the temperatures have a little bit increased and they are melted away. So that's already a loss. We'll never, the generation who will come will never realize that they will be reading in history that there used to be glaciers on Mount Kenya. That's a loss. That's perhaps a small one. Islands in the oceans, like Fiji, for example, because climate change is contributing towards this level of sea rise, they are likely to be submerged. And they may become extinct. That will be a serious loss.
So we'll even have extinct countries?
Yes, they will have extinct countries. There is a serious, peril faces us. Think of the city of Mombasa, for example. There is a saying that in the next 50 or 100 years, because of the level of sea rise, we may not have Mombasa city. Because the sea rising by a few centimeters, the water will overflow the city. Is a reality in terms of the serious perilous impacts of climate. So the city of Mombasa will be lost. Or even some of the seafronts that we now people enjoy when they go there, like the beaches and the rest, they will be submerged. So those are losses that are likely to come out of the impacts of climate change. So it is so serious and grievous, and it's a big issue. That's why you see the world community is discussing so much about climate change.
I appreciate that. So if you do enjoy the sandy beaches of Mombasa, now you know it has touched you personally at home now. So make sure you do pay attention and do come in and give solutions. From what I've heard, the young people can come and attend the conference and give solutions and way forward. So as a parting shot, because it's about time to conclude this segment, is there anything you feel that I may have left out that you need to mention to do with this climate change governance?
I think we have not looked at some of the things that the communities already are doing on the ground in terms of adaptation. There's one on water reusage. In Kilifi, the communities you're working with, particularly the women and young women, so the youth on the side of the women. We are talking about the women are the ones who are handling water most of the time, the domestic water use. And they're saying, how about we do dishes in containers, and then the water that is left, we use it to water our kitchen gardens. And then when we do laundry, we use the water to clean the house. Some of it we deposit in the washrooms, and some of it is used to sprinkle outside our small compounds when we don't want the dust to affect the house for recleaning. What is this doing for the general community? The water is a limited resource. If we maximize on the water use, in the long run, we are going to have more people able to access the clean water so that they can do the same chain of water reusage. And then there's the second one on water harvesting, rainwater harvesting, that like in Kilifi, they've added a component as a result of our engagement. Kilifi County has added a component of water harvesting into the policy on water, where every house is expected, every household building now, you're supposed to put gutters, you know, the water gutters and water storage facilities, where you harvest the water and you don't have to rely on the supply from the county. This water is usually wasted in this the runoff water. So this is captured and stored on the side. On one end, we are dealing with the structural change, and on the other, the county is talking about how they will be able to manage this city planning to enable them to harvest the runway water on that they can use later.
So basically, you're saying other counties should emulate Kilifi County when it comes to water management.
This is a very good system. Then we won't have to fight about who should pay us what, as we are hearing with the
with Murang'a
and Nairobi now.
All right. Thank you very much, Marie.
Well, Hilda, what I would call my parting shot is that we are at a very critical moment of human history, and we are calling upon the youth to take their rightful position because they have the highest stake when it comes to the future of development. Christian Aid had a consortium, and our development partners, including DFID, that's UK Aid in Kenya, and the Deepening Democracy Program, we have started a climate change governance program, and we are scaling out the Lake Region Economic Bloc counties. And therefore, we'll be coming down there. We want to have dialogue and discussions with the counties and the communities, and we'd like to see the marginalized groups, particularly the women and the youth, being part and parcel of this negotiation so that they can influence the policies that the counties are going to put in place regarding climate change response, because they're the biggest stakeholders moving into the future. I would point out that strongly, and really the youth, you have got an opportunity in terms of calculating the dialogue or the conversation on climate change into what you do, including, for example, your music and stuff like that, because you are the biggest stakeholders, and to be very honest, you are a treasured resource.
All right, thank you so much. We are a treasured resource and we should also protect our environment. Okay, you have been watching Youth and Politics, and today we had something completely different here. We had climate change governance conversation, and I hope you did learn something. And in case you missed it and you're just tuning into Y254 right now, you can slide over there at YouTube and you can also catch up with this interview. And do remember that this conference is going on this whole week, yeah?
Yes.
Yes, yes. So if you do want to participate in the conversation, do make sure you catch up with them. How do they get you on social media, by the way? If they want to attend the event and all that, how do they?
Well, if they want to get us on the event, of course, I think there's already a hashtag. If you just Google the climate change governance conference, you will get the various social media kind of contacts for you, the way you can reach us.
Thank you so much for coming to studio today. I'm so enlightened and I had so many big words. I was even panicking when I was about to do this interview. Anyway, it's about that time to conclude this segment. Valentine is coming up with a very special segment of Man Crush Monday, and today it's Ask Me Everything. So make sure you ask and ask away. I'm Hilda Walibi. Don't go anywhere.